Nothing like a little technical difficulty to get us going at 5 o'clock on this for Thursday.
Feel free to come up front as well. There's, we want to get cozy and talk about scaling Ethereum. My name is Xochitl Cazador. I'm Chief of Staff and Head of Operations at Optimism. I'm thrilled to be here with Ben Jones, one of the co-founders of Optimism. Before we get started, I wanted to do a quick poll. How many people in the room have heard about Optimism? Right. How many people have used Optimism? All right. Pretty cool.
I dig it. We'll get it up to 100% soon.
Yeah. So many of you have experimented with and used Optimism. So Optimism has really been at the forefront of scaling Ethereum through the development of the OP stack, contributing to Ethereum through like 4844, proposing new interop standards, and really developing new novel governance mechanisms. And I can't leave out funding retroactive public goods as well. Ben, I wanted to kind of start by going back in time a little bit and talking about what inspired Optimism to really solve Ethereum scaling challenges.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's kind of two parts to the answer. The first one is the easy scaling part, which is back in the day, forget about using apps, forget about building apps. The reality was that we were in a world where writing a smart contract and testing it was a god-awful experience, quite frankly. And at the time, there was a set of very devout followers that understood that the world computer and its vision was going to turn into something more, and it was worth going through the schlep of like Web3.js version hell with dependency chaos. But even once you got past that, what became apparent was that if you actually wanted to build an app to go viral, that was just not going to be able to happen. The reality was that Ethereum as a chain only had so much throughput, and you could fill up that throughput very quickly. I mean, the famous example is in 2017, CryptoKitties, the first like NFTs before they were NFTs, got really popular, and suddenly transaction fees popped off and became tens of dollars. So we all sort of oriented around that, and when the co-founding crew kind of came together, we were just a bunch of nerds in the Ethereum ecosystem excited to solve these problems. And what we realized was that there was actually a second layer of problem, which was the fact that the research to scale blockchains was not getting funded. So we started off as a nonprofit organization, and we basically just published free research to the community to try to advance the space and make the chain scalable. Quickly, what we realized was that we were a bunch of like diehard, devout little Ethereum nerds off in a corner. But quickly, when you want to like actually go and implement things and hire real adults, this is not so easy. So the second part of the story was realizing that one, this isn't working as a nonprofit, and two, it should work as a nonprofit. So that is the public goods funding part of the journey was. Once we scale chains and have this infrastructure, the reality is we're going to fall into the same traps that we did in Web 2 if we don't have a way to fund open source software.
Just kind of building on that a little bit, Optimism has a quite distinctive culture. Would love for you to kind of explain that, what inspired the name Optimism, what's the story behind it, and how do you see that reflected in the community?
We're optimistic, can't you tell? I mean, I think what's awesome about the collective today is that it is, becoming a bit more plural. Now we have like very large chain ecosystems that are flourishing with their own little subcultures of optimism, which is super, super awesome to see. In terms of where the name came concretely, effectively the scaling approach that we pushed forward was called an optimistic rollup, and before that we had optimistic plasmas. But at the end of the day, the key insight onto how to scale chains is you don't go to, like, you think of the layer one, the Ethereum chain, as like a court system. It's like this trustless state machine that you can run smart contracts through. The reality is that we have a legal system, but nobody goes to court to cash a check. You only go to court if the check bounces. And that's kind of the key insight into scaling chains, is to understand that you need to use the layer one more efficiently, more akin to a court system than to a direct state transition sort of application substrate block space, as we might call it. So kind of the way that a check works, right, is you optimistically accept a check as payment and you go to court if the check fails. So this is kind of the, and Optimistic execution in the way of computer science is, a similar term that was borrowed from that. And so we said, what the hell, I guess it's really called Optimism, we're happy people.
Awesome. I think Optimism has, achieved some really amazing stats over the last several months. 45% of all L2 transactions are on the OP stack. If we think about it from the perspective of a chain that's launching an L2 base, as like an example, what problems is OP stack solving?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it is the scalability one that we just talked about, right, which comes down to cost and throughput. One of the things that we learned, so when Optimism started, we were just building one chain, OP mainnet. And one thing that we very quickly realized was that actually there was all this complex research that we had done, and then there was the reality of running infrastructure to keep a chain operational. And that also turns out to be an incredibly hard challenge. That's its own other sort of beast. So one of the things that it does is just provide an open source standard that is a very stable, very performant piece of software that people can use. It's just tough to build a chain, and we learned the hard lessons the hard way on our chain before opening up to many other folks to deploy chains.
It allows the chains to focus on innovation or things that they want to push forward without having to worry about core infrastructure.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, if crypto goes well, nobody is going to be thinking about chains. It's an honor that so many folks raised their hand when we said who's used Optimism. I hope that the answer is all hands and nobody raises their hand because they don't even know in the next generation of crypto. The reality is that these systems are not going to work. It's like you don't think about the internet service provider that you use, you just open up, Twitter and doom scroll. So hopefully we don't have doom scrolling, but something a little more optimistic. But at the end of the day, you have to provide infrastructure, and that has to be invisible.
Awesome. So the Optimism Superchain is made up of many chains. We talked about a few of them. Base, World Chain, recent announcements with Unichain, Sony, and Kraken. How do you balance technical innovation for some of these unique chains and feeding it back into the wider OP stack?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and the answer is you have to walk a balance. Where does that balance start? That balance starts with open source. So actually, I was really pleased to see the optimistic AI evaluation that you saw on screen in the last presentation is a fork of the OP stack. It's MIT licensed, you go crazy. When we built it, did we expect anyone to be building a fault proof for a stable diffusion inference run? No, definitely not, but it's awesome that people are doing it, and that's the power of open source. So it starts with that, and then the other piece of it is standardization. So the way that open source, the thing that open source risks is a degree of fragmentation and division of efforts, which means that now everyone is sort of maintaining their own fork. So the way that you have to balance it is you need to be open source. People need to be able to fork it and do insane, batshit, crazy shit, pardon my language, crazy stuff that we saw with AI. At the same time, we want to facilitate and foster a healthy community standard that gives people the choice between pushing really heavy on the infrastructural innovation or just some really solid, out-of-the-box open source infra.
So the Superchain vision involves native interoperability. Would love for you to kind of share more what is native interop, what's Optimism doing to help drive these standards, not just within the Superchain, but really kind of thinking about Ethereum overall.
Yeah, so it's really awesome, quite frankly. Ethereum now is on a next leg of a very exciting journey, which is we have succeeded in scaling. Along the way, what we have also succeeded in doing is fragmenting. So when you go and use OP mainnet or Base or one of these chains, you have to have this thing called a wallet, and you have to click the network that you are on and choose an RPC URL and then make sure the chain ID is right and all these crazy things. So what Ethereum has done really well has expanded massively. We've gone from 30 transactions per second to thousands and thousands. At the same time, along the way, what we've done is we've done that by basically sharding the state into substates that have to be interacted with differently. And so this won't work. Again, this is like saying, oh, to view a certain website, you have to use a different internet service provider, right? This is absolutely insane. So the next kind of leg for Ethereum's scaling journey is to basically make the chains fade into the background, and this requires some notion of interoperation. So even when you use a wallet today, a lot of wallets will show what is your balance on OP mainnet, what is your balance on Base, what is your balance on Ethereum. And of course, it would be really nice, and some wallets do even just aggregate these balances into one. But that only works if balances can be moved between chains. And sort of the current iteration of scaling tech focused on building out a single chain, and we have that now. But the trade-off is that this optimistic protocol that we do, where you have to give somebody time to kind of go to court if the check bounced, means that you have to wait between moving assets between these ecosystems. So native interoperability for the Superchain is about solving that problem in the same protocol level, where you basically can dispute a check bouncing when you're in terms of assets moving across chains, not just in terms of assets moving within a chain. So that's native interoperability. The other cool thing is just the broader Ethereum interoperability that's going on right now. And this is often called chain abstraction, seems to be the word that we're coalescing around. And basically what this says is there needs to be ways to express behaviors that are different than transactions. And in particular, the other word that we're coalescing around is intents. So what is intent? An intent is a expressed desire by a user. And so it's a little bit of a different model. It's kind of like declarative versus imperative in computer science, where instead of a user saying, I would like to sign this transaction to perform X, the user says, I have a desire for this change to be made. And so a simple example of an intent is, I would like some tokens over on this chain. And the way that an intent works is it allows anybody to send tokens on your behalf. And what you say is, I will give you the tokens where they currently are on this chain, so that you send the tokens over here, I can just use them, my intent is fulfilled, and for a small fee, I'll give you the tokens that I had over here. So those are kind of the two parts of the interoperability story for Ethereum right now. There's expressing things in a way that gets closer to what users want, as opposed to particular users that they may or may not be able to perform. And then actually making the sort of financial execution, settlement of those intents cheaper is the responsibility of things like native interop.
I think this is really exciting, because if you think about all of us in this room and having used crypto and just some of the frustration in terms of using multiple wallets, having to kind of choose specific chains, make sure that you've got gas. This, I think, is going to be the key to unlocking what we're thinking about, mass adoption of blockchain. So I'm really excited about this. The Optimism Collective has developed a unique approach to protocol governance. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about block space charters and the blockchains.
Sure. Oh man, this one can go deep. So one of the interesting fundamental differences between sort of layer 1s and layer 2s has to do with how these systems are governed. So first of all, what is governance? I think at the simplest level in this context, it's describing how do we make improvements to the chain. So Ethereum has gone over a number of hard forks over the years, forks where the software improves, dials are turned, new features are introduced. And it becomes really tricky, how do you deal with this in a layer 2 context? The way that it works in layer 1 Ethereum is effectively rough social consensus. So what does that mean? It effectively means people choose what version of open source software to run, and a consensus is formed around what the new version of the software that they should be running is. This poses a very different challenge in the context of layer 2 innovation. Because in layer 2, the whole point of layer 2 is that you have this dispute system, this way for somebody to go and say, I am going to just, claim that this check bounced and I can prove it. So the entire story of layer 2 centers around proofs. The ability for you to go and say, my check bounced, relies on a smart contract on layer 1 that validates whether or not the check bounced and whether it was meant to be paid, et cetera, et cetera. So this poses a very interesting challenge for the L2 in industry, because we can't purely rely on social consensus on what is the right version of software that I should be running and simply running that software. Because if you're running different software than what the dispute game, what the settlement layer of L1 thinks, it doesn't matter that you're running that version of the software. The reality is that they're going to say your check bounced whether you like it or not. So this is the problem of sort of layer 2 governance. And it is a very interesting one, and it's very notable because it has major impacts on the decentralization of these protocols. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, in the majority of cases of layer 2s today, there is an upgrade multisig that is able to step in and arbitrarily change the check bounce dispute resolution function. This is not decentralized, especially if that's a multi-sig of like some project and their co-founders or friends or what have you, and this is a big problem. So the question becomes, can we do better? And the general answer is, we hope yes, is on-chain governance. But kind of more deeply, the question becomes, in a world where you have to decide on software in a smart contract, what is the mechanism by which that version of software on the layer 1 is updated? How do we change what is in the settlement layer? And that's a very deep question. And the other question becomes, as you introduce more stakeholders into the equation, how should those decisions be made? So in the early days, OP mainnet was the only chain that we were worried about, and we could make the decisions that were best for us. Now there's a huge set of stakeholders, not just across OP mainnet, but across the entire Superchain. And all of these stakeholders need to be considered as you decide how to do upgrades. So, every upgrade you want to basically go through a list of all your stakeholders and say, is this stakeholder going to be okay? Is this stakeholder going to be okay? What are the impacts across the board? So, yeah, you mentioned the log chains and block space charters. Effectively, these are a set of tools that the Optimism Collective, which is our on-chain DAO, has built to essentially develop an SLA, like a service level agreement, the rules of the road for how Optimism goes about performing upgrades. And it says things like, we can never violate the semantics of a smart contract. So if you are a developer that deployed a smart contract, we cannot introduce a breaking upgrade that changes the rules of how smart contracts are interpreted, because that breaks the social contract between governance and that smart contract deployer. So, yeah, little rambling there, but governance is my soft spot. I can just keep talking all day, but there's a little bit about it.
I think it's been really great to see this come along. Again, very elegant and novel approach to governance, and really making sure that each chain is engaged in this through the chain governors, and really exciting. I wanted to talk a little bit about on-chain capital allocation, like retro PGF. We talked about retro public good funding. What is the relationship, and I think this kind of ties back to the origin story that you talked about a little bit earlier on, between retro PGF, the concept, and building sustainable blockchain infrastructure?
Yeah, so there's a dirty little secret in crypto, which is that we call ourselves the third web. But the stories that the original internet told were actually far more similar to the stories that we tell ourselves today than I think we give ourselves credit for. I love the Declaration. Has anyone read the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace? Yeah, we got one in the back. That is a banger, John Perry Barlow. Go check it out. This was written in the late 90s and was basically the cypherpunks' statement that we are in control of the internet. The capital and the corporations of the flesh and steel world do not belong here. And it was very moving. It definitely kind of like spurred a cultural moment in the internet, and that moment was quickly extinguished by capital and the rise of the mega corporations that run the internet today. Unfortunately, the hard reality is that we have some of those same stories playing out exactly as they did, I mean, maybe not exactly, on different rails, which is arguably worse because those rails are unstoppable fundamentally. But we have many of those same stories playing out today. The reality is that a huge number of businesses that are built around Web3 are themselves either closed source or rely fundamentally on centralized infrastructure defeating the purpose of the whole thing. And fundamentally, that's what happens. So, yeah, that's why the fundamental goal of Optimism is to fund public goods and make it a viable, competitive alternative to building closed source software, to simply build open source software and give it away. So fees generated by the Optimism Superchain are all reinvested into the most important public goods, the open source software that made it possible, so that it is possible to keep software open source so that we don't have the same trap that we fell into with the original internet. Because the reality is, the picture was painted, it was going to be amazing, and capital got in the way.
I think when you look at the Ethereum Foundation, they just published their annual report. Optimism actually funded a lot of public good funding, and it was really great to see that call out in the report. I know we're short on time, I wanted to, last question, if you could leave this audience with one key message about the future of blockchain scalability and Optimism's role in it, what would it be?
Oh man, I mean, I just gave the public good spiel. I guess the other one I would say is making blockchains invisible. We are now at a point in time where I feel pretty good about the state of infrastructure, about the transactions per second, albeit that's a bad metric, that we can support, the throughput that we can support and put into decentralized rails. There's more work to do always, and of course, but we're getting a lot better. Now, what we face is the adoption problem, is the fact that it is absolutely impossible to use all these applications without learning a bunch of buzzwords and writing down, random strings of characters. It's just crazy. So, I guess my parting thoughts would be, please make nobody know that they have used Optimism. That will make me so happy.
Thank you.